Whenever the news cycle looks like it's going slower a little bit, we can always trust the Chinese to liven things up or to bring us something important to talk about. In this case, with some help from the Washington Post. So Washington Post has broken a story that the Chinese are now building a naval base or a military base essentially for the Navy on the southwestern coast of Cambodia. Now, Cambodia is not a country we think about a great deal. It so happens it's an ASEAN country. It so happens that this year it is the chair of ASEAN, the 10 nation grouping. But it's not a country which we think about in any other way except maybe for cultural reasons, because it's a Buddhist country. 97% of its people are Buddhists, and its constitution actually proclaims Buddhism as the official faith of the nation. It also has the great temples that we all know about, Angkor Wat. Now, Cambodia through the 70s, 80s, 90s has been a very unstable country. But the important thing is that for almost 40, not exactly 40 years, but almost 40 years, generally, it's been controlled by one man, one leader, who's Hun Sen. He's the Prime Minister of Cambodia. Now, Cambodia has also had a fraught relationship with its neighbors, Vietnam and Thailand, but more Vietnam than Thailand. During the Vietnam War, Cambodia was neutral, and yet that war spilled into Cambodian territory because Cambodian territory was badly governed or badly protected. So that war spread into Cambodia, and after that, there was a time when Cambodia and Vietnam went to war that I will talk about in just a bit. Now what's happened is, if you look at this map of that part of the world, I am just looking at my globe here, and on the screen, you will see the same part of the world expanded. Right? If you see this, you will see what are we talking about. So this is, you are still in Indian Ocean. Still, the Philippines is to your east, way to the east. After Philippines, we had told you the Pacific Ocean begins. So you are sort of in the heart of Indo-Pacific. And this is where the southern part of Cambodia is. The southern part of Cambodia is coastal. Now Cambodia is bordered by Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, like that. But its southern part is coastal. And that opens out in what is the Gulf of Thailand. So if you see this, you will see that it's almost like a cul-de-sac. It ends up alongside Thailand. And actually, if you look at the map, it will look to you as if this is quite close, to say the Greater Nicobars, the Indian island properties. The fact is that there is no direct marine route between the two. You still have to come around quite a bit of territory, but the fact is, as a crow flies, it's not that far from that region. So we have to understand the geography so that we get an idea of how sensitive this area is. Now, this is where, at a place called Ream Naval Base, REAM. That is a Cambodian base. Now that Cambodian base has been there for a long time. In fact, if anything, that Cambodian base earlier had a tactical headquarters built with American help. Couple of years back, this tactical headquarters was demolished. And if you want to read more about it, you should read in an article that's been written today by Adil Brar, who's a bright, young China expert. We don't have many like that in India. He's right now studying at a foreign university, but he understands Chinese, he reads, writes Chinese, he also follows Chinese mainstream media, social media all the time. Also follow his Twitter handle if you want to learn more about China or if you want to keep track of what's happening in China. So he explains that this is where this tactical headquarters built with American help was demolished. And when that was demolished in 2019, there were suspicions that maybe from America now, the Cambodians were shifted their allegiance or their dependence to the Chinese. See, Hun Sen has been in power for a long time, and anybody who's been in power that long has many enemies and many threats. So his foreign threats are his old tensions with Thailand, which is more like an American ally, a friend of America, and Vietnam. Vietnam has also had a fraught relationship with China. They fought a war about 45 years ago, And also in South China Sea, Vietnam and China have had rivalries for more than 50 years now. So Vietnam again has a history with Cambodia. So to find protection or to prolong his rule, Hun Sen needs the support of China. So the understanding is, or the theory is, or the belief is that he is now reaching out to the Chinese to get that protective umbrella. And this has got the Americans very upset. Americans have talked about this, they've complained about this. It's got America's allies upset, it's got the Quad partners upset. India will not easily speak about these things. Penny Wong, the new Australian foreign minister, she in a phone call with her Cambodian counterpart raised this issue that are you now allowing the Chinese to build a naval base at Ream. Now, Ream is a very interesting area. Again, if you look at the area, southern coast, we told you, this is sort of the northern end of this coast, right? Very close to Thailand, as close to Thailand as some place or some installation in Cambodia can be. That's one. The second thing is, it's very close also to a province called Sihanouk Vil. Now, Narodom Sihanouk, you might remember, was a great prince, ruler, king of Cambodia. He's an interesting character and has a very interesting life. And not just because he was a film star, film singer, film producer. I think he acted in more than 50 films, or he made more than 50 films. He was quite a sexy character all his life. But also because he was that unusual king who was succeeded by his father. So in fact, if you're reading up on him, and you will see succeeded by so-and-so, and if you try and look up so-and-so, it'll say so-and-so was his father. So how come somebody succeeded by his father? So in the mid-50s, he was anointed king in 1941. Then Cambodia became a Japanese colony. Then it became a French colony. Then it became free. Sort of in 1953, Sihanouk was the king. He had been anointed king at a young age in 41, I told you. But then he decided to abdicate and join mainstream politics. So become a political activist, run his politics, right? So he was a prince or a ruler or sovereign who became a politician. And he abdicated in favor of who else but my dad. So the dad became his successor and Sihanouk came in later. This province is named after Sihanouk, and the main city there is Sihanouk Vil. The main city there is Sihanouk Vil, Sihanouk city. Now that is the city where casinos thrive. And that city is a kind of a Chinese hangout. So once again, if you read Adil Bra's story, he gives you great description of what's happening there. He says, for example, that this is a place which has a population, the province has a population of about 150,000, but say in the year 2017, for which numbers are available, more than 120,000 Chinese tourists came there, and 78,000 Chinese became residents there. This is mostly richer Chinese. What is the reason? The reason is that while in Cambodia, gambling is banned for the natives, foreigners are allowed to gamble. So we learn from Adil Bra's article that the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, it has estimated that out of the 234 casinos in all of Southeast Asia, 150 are based in Cambodia. And most of these are in Sihanouk Vil. Now, once again, there is a quote from Nikkei Asian Review. Please read that quote. And that tells you that sources have told Nikkei Asian Review that almost every casino has a money exchange facility, and it's almost as if every table has a money transfer, money wiring system placed next to it. So people who are gambling can have money wired in so they can go on. And this is where it's been described as a place where Chinese, almost always it's the rich Chinese gambling, and they gamble with wads of $100 notes. So the Chinese have pretty much taken over that place, and they are coming in, and also property in that area is being sold and bought in China. So the Chinese already have a footprint there. That is just 30 kilometers away from this naval base. In fact, if you look at the southern coast of Cambodia, you will see that the Chinese have now plants, their power plants, offshore mining units, etc., whose value is nearly $5 billion. Also, Chinese in the last couple of years have invested nearly $5 billion in Cambodia. Now, how do you put that $5 billion in perspective? That $5 billion, the value of that can be understood if you also keep in mind the fact that Cambodia's own nominal GDP is just about $25 billion. So it's a lot of money for Cambodia. And that is what's got everybody worried. Now, today, as we are recording this, today is when the groundbreaking ceremony for this new base, which is being constructed, has taken place. And at the groundbreaking ceremony, where Cambodia's defense minister was present, but also the Chinese ambassador was present. And Chinese ambassador it was who accused the West or a particular country, a particular big power, of running a smear campaign against Cambodia and China. And he said, look, it's one country which is doing it, and they are disguising their opposition to Cambodia's seeking its own sovereign security interests. They are disguising it under democracy, human rights, and they say they are the ones who are driven by unilateralism and extreme egoism. Similarly, Zhao Lijian, our favorite spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, he's also said this is typical bully behavior by the Americans. In fact, what might be helpful is if I read for you the exact para spoken by the Chinese ambassador to Cambodia, to Phnom Penh, that is Wang Wenxian, who says, and I quote, "One building bases around the world is not China, and the one with the maximum military bases around the world isn't China." So you know who he's referring to, America. Again, I quote, "The one damaging regional peace and security by building regional cliques." So refer to Quad, for example. "The one damaging regional peace and security by building regional cliques also isn't China." So that is how strongly they've reacted. Now the Cambodian defense minister, T-Ban, T-E-A-B-A-N-H, he said that, look, this is all a propaganda, this is all malicious, we are not giving bases to anybody. Our constitution also does not allow the setting up of foreign bases. But it's not the first time that these suspicions have arisen. Right now, the satellite pictures have come out. Earlier satellite pictures came out of the destruction or demolition of these earlier bases or earlier facilities built with American money. That was the demolition of the tactical headquarters that I told you about. Also, demolition of the National Committee for Maritime Security's rigid hulled inflatable boat facility, RHIB. You will see how that boat looks like on the screen. Now that, and there was a boat ramp close to that, those were all demolished. And that's when the suspicions began that maybe Cambodians wanted to build something bigger there. They don't have the money. So where will they get the money from? And what use do they have for something like this? They have very small armed forces, etc., particularly naval forces. So suspicion had then arisen that this is about the Chinese. So it is then that the Americans had expressed concern about it. Mike Pompeo, the former American Secretary of State, had talked about it, and he had expressed concern. Earlier in 2021, Wendy Sherman, Deputy Secretary of State, on a visit to Cambodia, had also raised these issues. In 2019, Wall Street Journal had broken a story that China and Cambodia had signed a clandestine security agreement, whereby maybe bases were going to be offered to China. Of course, even then it was denied by both sides. Now, how sensitive is this place in terms of Chinese interests and Cambodia's relationship with China? Because it was in the same general area that the old joint Vietnamese friendship building was located, right? It was then shifted from there and relocated far away, so there will be no clash between Vietnamese working there and the Chinese workers who are coming in, because Vietnam and China have a tense relationship. Vietnam and Cambodia have had problems. Now, this is a complex history, so I'm not going into all of it, but 1970, there was a US-supported coup that brought in the Republic of Khmer, in spite of the fact that until 1970, Cambodia was neutral in the Vietnam War. That lasted about 5 years when the leftist Khmer Rouge takeover or revolution took place. That led to the great massacres of Cambodia, the Pol Pot massacres between 1975 and 79. And once again, there was an upheaval and systems kept on changing. It was in 1979. How did the big change come about? The big change came about because the Vietnamese launched war on Cambodia, which was then Kampuchea, to bring about a regime change. And the Vietnamese succeeded. After that, much later, they were the peace accords in Paris, etc., etc. We are not going in all those details. That's too much complexity right now for the purposes of what we are doing now, except to say that Vietnam and Cambodia have had that fraught relationship. Vietnam and Cambodia have fought a war. Vietnam and the Chinese have fought a war. In fact, generally in the same epoch. And those scars remain. So Cambodia maybe sees China as a more natural protector of its sovereignty, freedom, etc., etc. And that's how it becomes such an important development. Now, if you read this Washington Post report, this also tells you what is it that the Chinese have located in this place. So they've quoted high Chinese officials also, off the record, obviously, anonymously, saying this also houses a ground station technology base for Beidou. Now, Beidou, Beidou, that is the navigation satellite system, a kind of Chinese equivalent of the American-controlled GPS, Global Positioning System. So the Chinese use it not just for their navigation, for their flights, for their ships, submarines, but they also use this system for targeting of their missiles, weapons, etc., etc. So this is crucial to China for global tracking and space assets, but also weapon targeting and also military movements. Now, Chinese have been working on this for a long time. You know that Chinese have the only other base the Chinese have, the only real base right now, full-fledged base, is Djibouti, and that sits at a very crucial place. That sits on the mouth of the Red Sea, where it comes towards Indian Ocean. Similarly, this one is in a critical area, and Chinese have been trying to get more bases. There was a story some time back that the Chinese were building a little facility for themselves on Abu Dhabi port, and that story broke and the Americans brought in a lot of pressure, and looks like that project has now stopped. Also, just as we are recording this, Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, has just finished a 10-day tour of the South Pacific, looking for security deals of some kind in entire South Pacific after the agreement they signed with Solomon Islands, which we spoke about earlier in an episode of Cut the Clutter. But that has not really succeeded fully because many countries have pushed back, particularly Fiji. Fijian parliament has said no, but you know the Chinese, they are persistent. So while on the one hand, they are attacking America for creating cliques and for bringing in militarization in the Indo-Pacific, which they call Asia-Pacific, they are doing precisely that. And what is happening on Cambodia's southern coast, something as far away from our minds as conceivable, they are also following the same objective.